So today I wanted to make a video talking about Higurashi, which is a series I love and I really wanted to make a video on, especially with the new season that's coming out, and I had been thinking about what I could do, but after episode 4, there was just no way I could hold off on making this video. So, background time. Higurashi no Naku Koro ni, or When They Cry, is an anime that aired originally in 2006 and was made by Studio Deen. And the anime was focused in Hinamizawa around a friend group of Keiichi Maebara, Rena Ryuugu, Mion Sonozaki, Rika Furude, and Satoko Houjou. We soon very quickly learned that there are some really sinister things going on in the background of this town, and that there are some murders that occur once a year after the Cotton Drifting Festival. Flash forward 14 years and we get a remake announced being made by Passione Studios. Now this was pretty exciting. A lot of people were thinking that this was going to be Higurashi's time to shine, and that there was nothing that was going to come in the way. It was going to be a good remake, and then they immediately bait and switch us on episode 2. They changed the title of the show, and there's a ton of information that people who haven't seen the original Higurashi would not understand. Now, this is where I'm going to answer the question once and for all. Higurashi 2020 is 100% a sequel. I know they tried to advertise it as a remake, but there's just zero way that anyone watching this series for the first time would be able to really appreciate everything that's going on. If you do happen to be watching this for the first time through the 2020 version, congratulations to you. I'll be providing some information today from the original that can help those of you that are watching the 2020 version with your theories, so I'll provide timestamps in the description for every piece I talk about, and I'll mark those with spoilers as spoiler. Now with that being said, today we're going to be talking about events that happened in the original run of the series, and how they have changed in the new season, and what this all means. Because a lot has changed. I've seen some people reviewing this on Mao saying that it's basically the same, and that is just not true. There is a lot that is different. Watching episode 4 had me bouncing out of my seat with some of the stuff that was happening. But this is your warning. If you haven't seen the original, as I mentioned earlier, I am going to be talking about a lot of the stuff from the original in today's video. So do yourself a favor and go watch it. The pacing is actually really phenomenal, and the overarching story that comes into play in every season is great. But with that being said, let's talk about it. Now we'll be going through the first 4 episodes of both series to compare and contrast the two. We'll be seeing what's different, what's the same, and what the new changes mean in the long run. I'll also be filling in gaps for those that don't know about information or have forgotten about some details. In episode 1 of the original series, we got an introduction to Hinamizawa and to the characters, as well as the bat scene at the beginning, you know, where he's just bah, bah. The 2020 version hits a lot of the same beats, but it does build off of a lot of stuff the original introduced and add to them. Change number 1, Keiichi scratching his neck very obviously in the scene where he's beating Rena to death with the bat at the very beginning. This at first put me under the impression of foreshadowing the later introduction of Hinamizawa syndrome, which for those that don't know what that is, I'll go ahead and define what that is, because Hinamizawa syndrome is going to be really important in this video. So Hinamizawa syndrome is a parasite or a disease that inhabits the brain of everyone that lives in Hinamizawa, and it can be adopted by anyone that stays in the town for too long. The syndrome has 5 stages. At stage 1, the disease is dormant and doesn't act or bother the person it inhabits at all. However, after the person is put through an abnormal amount of physical or mental stress, the parasite will trigger to life. Stages 2 and 3 seem to be escalating levels of paranoia and anxiety. At stage 4, it becomes extreme and can lead to hallucination. At stage 5, the hallucinations and paranoia are pushed to their limits and always lead to the person that has the parasite active in them to brutally murder whoever they're paranoid of. Also, throughout all of the stages, there is a feeling of maggots underneath the person's skin, and at stage 5, it grows very strong, particularly in the lungs, and usually leads to them clawing out their own throats, killing themselves. Stage 5 can be manually injected into someone, as we see that this has been the cause of presumably all of Tomitaki Jiro's deaths in the original. Takano Mio claims that Rika is a queen carrier and gives off a pheromone that keeps the disease dormant in those that live in the town. But this is proven false multiple times, such as the time she was killed by Mion Sonozaki. When Shion killed her, everyone in the village remained alive and didn't fall victim to Hinamizawa syndrome. Keiichi scratching his neck, I thought would be big foreshadowing to his death in episode 4, but you know, I was a little bit wrong about that, because Keiichi didn't kill people in episode 4, so yeah, I don't think any OG watchers saw that coming. Change number 2, the scene of Rika looking grimly at the calendar and Satoko asking her if something was wrong. This at first I thought was foreshadowing for the remake to later introduce Rika being incarnated over and over and over again by Hanyu, but this is later proven false in episode 2. Number 3, the game they play. In the original, they play a card game where all the cards are marked, so everyone has an advantage, except for Keiichi, because, you know, fuck Keiichi. Since he's new, he didn't know the cards at all, so he was going to lose by default default, at least that's what they assume. This is Keiichi's first game in the club, and what they use to let him into it. The remake skips this, likely to keep old viewers interested, and they play a scavenger hunt instead. This isn't a huge difference, but it does lead to some fan service or foreshadowing when Keiichi opens the locker and Satoshi's bat is inside of it. But there is one important scene that did come from them playing this game, and that's where Rena's dazing off at Satoko. She very clearly has something going on in her head this scene, and she leaves everyone alone and goes home, which is very unlike Rena. Now, remember this little bit of information because this scene is going to be a little bit more important later on. Change number 4, the scene where Keiichi finds the magazine that tells him about the Hinamizawa dam murders. First off, I would just like to say that I got such goosebumps when the original opening started playing. That was such a cool moment and it made me really happy. Anyways, this scene starts with Keiichi calling out to Rena, and Rena clearly being surprised or shocked by him being there. This is easy to tell from the way her body jerks upon hearing his voice. This scene then plays out a bit fairly normal like the original, and then once Keiichi finds the magazines, we see Rena with an extremely dead, cold look in her eyes. Now this is very different, and after episode 4, I think it's deliberately different on purpose. In the original, we see Rena walking with her normal look in her eyes with the blade, and she's humming. She looks normal, and that's the key there. She is normal. This is before Keiichi started hallucinating in the original, so she is like 100% genuine. In the remake, she has a completely cold look in her eyes, and she's just standing there watching him. This, in tandem to her reaction when Keiichi arrives, should have made it obvious to me that things were gonna be very different this time around. After this, the credits roll with the original opening. Just a masterpiece. And we see Rika with red in her eyes, clearly possessed, or definitely nodding to some supernatural occurrences happening. This combined with other foreshadowing in this episode and how it played out super similarly to the original most definitely led every single viewer to think that this was a more detail-oriented version of the original, and that it would reach its masterpiece status that it deserved because it's in like the top 10 visual novels of all time. However, this is how Passion set up for the perfect bait and switch. Episode 2 changes everything. The very beginning of this episode, we are greeted with Hanyu and Rika having a conversation in a void. Extremely different from that of episode 2 of the original. Hanyu actually wasn't even introduced until season 2 of the original. Hanyu tells Rika that she's come back despite beating the game, which this is key because it tells us that this Rika that's in the show is the one that comes from season 2 of Higurashi, where she broke the cycle and set everyone free. Somehow, she's back. How? We don't really know, in all honesty, but the person that likely is the cause of this is the one that's smiling in the shadows in the opening. I assume this is one of the gods from Umiko. If you don't know what that is, comment down below, and I'll make a video talking about Umiko and its connections to Higurashi. Anyways, Rika is determined that she will win again because she assumes everything will be exactly the same as it was last time. Yeah, moments before disasters. We're going to talk about the differences in both episode 2 and 3 of the 2020 version, because episode 2 of the original covers events that happen in both of these episodes. Change number 1. In the original, Rena doesn't attempt to swing her machete thing at all, but in the new version, she's very clearly trying to attack Keiichi from behind for a second while her eyes are still dead. This was likely a warning ahead of time that she was planning on killing him, but she must have had a sudden change of heart, and it delayed her killing him for a little while. Change number 2. When Keiichi is trying to dig up the Kenta doll. This part is huge. Like, this is a really big moment, because Keiichi is swinging the machete to get out Kenta-kun, and while he's swinging, he very clearly remembers when he beat Rena and Mion to death. Keiichi, before this moment in the 2020 season, only remembered this 20 episodes later after a few cycles had gone by. So him remembering this early on is a really big game changer. I don't think this will be the first time this happens either. I expect something similar for this to happen in all of the remaining arcs, to be honest. Rena is staring at him very blankly in this scene too, but she has the same expression that he did. So it might not be too far-fetched to think Rena also remembered Keiichi killing her and Mion. Change number 3. I have no idea if this is Higurashi being deliberately meta on purpose, but the scene where Keiichi susses Tomitake when he rolls away. Keiichi says that he feels like Tomitake comes to Hinamizawa for different reason than he says, which is completely true since we know he comes to Hinamizawa as a bodyguard for Takano's research on the Hinamizawa syndrome. Change number 4. The festival. The new version of the show seems to be heavily pushing Keiichi and Rena as a couple, as in the next few episodes they have a lot of romantic-esque moments together. A few of them are urged by Mion, which is incredibly odd because in the original, Mion had very deep feelings for Keiichi that often led to her being jealous over some things that happened with Rena and him, like with the doll scene. So her leaving Keiichi and Rena alone at purpose multiple times makes me raise my eyebrows. I have 3 ideas of what this could mean. 1, this show is going to push Rena x Keiichi and leave Mion's feelings for Keiichi behind in the original show. 2, they're going to introduce Mion's feelings in the next arc of the show. Or 3, this was actually Shion pretending to be Mion. Shion never actually had any feelings for Keiichi, so it could make a lot of sense for this to be her. Now, with Rika's dance, it was very ambiguous in the original as to what she was actually doing. My first impressions of her dance was that she was hitting cotton with a hoe and then carving off pieces for those to carve off their cotton and drift it down the river. The sequel really doesn't beat around the bush like that, like, at all. They make it really obvious as to what Rika's dance is supposed to be symbolic of. Now, this is probably the most important part from the festival, and that's that Keiichi never interacts with Tomitake and Takano. This is huge because him talking to these two in the original is what starts his anxiety about when they go missing that he is going to be the next person killed. And this is also how he learns about all the murders for the past 4 years in Hinamizawa. Rena and Mion weren't present at all in this scene in the original, which leads him to really suspect these two of killing them, and even furthering his anxiety leading into stage 5 of Hinamizawa syndrome. With him never interacting with this two, his anxiety never really goes past stage 3, and barely dips into stage 4 at all, so hardly anything he sees is actually a hallucination. When Rena tells him he was lying and he was talking to Ooshi, this is actually likely 100% real because we see Rena stalking Keiichi in the woods when he's walking on his own. The fact that Rena is stalking him once means that she probably could have done it again. When Keiichi sees Rena at night that one time when he's having a hard time sleeping, this actually very well could have been real. Change number 5. This is actually ridiculously important. Tomitake and Takano could still be alive when Ooshi is talking to Keiichi. He tells him that they've been missing since last night. I have no clue if this is a translation error or not, but he never mentions how they died. He just says that they went missing. In the original, Tomitake was always found dead with his throat clawed out, and Takano's body was found in a barrel in the mountains. But she had been dead for a day already. If they are both missing, this means Takano actually may not be at work behind the scenes this time, which we'll talk more about later. Change number 6. Rena's conversation with Keiichi. In the sequel, she goes on a tangent about trying really hard to be happy, and she has a grim smile on her face. She says she worked very hard. What does this all mean? Well, thanks to Reddit user ShareOnyx, really hope I said that correctly, from the Higurashi subreddit, we were able to find out that her speech is from the Sumi Horoboshi Hen manga, which is the arc in the original where she kills the prostitute that's been sleeping with her dad, and then she kills Satoko's uncle. This speech wasn't as similar in the original anime to the new version, as the new version is the manga, where I've been told that she speaks everything that she says in this scene word for word in the manga. This means that Rena has already murdered the prostitute that's been sleeping with her dad, and she likely assumes that Keiichi talking with Ooshi means she's going to get arrested and taken away from her father. Now let's get to the nitty-gritty that is episode 4 of Higurashi Go. There is a really good amount to unpack here, so I'll get to the differences and new additions very quickly so we can talk about what this all means. Change number 1. In the original, Keiichi skips school to go to the clinic, which is open. Dr. Eri tells him that he's sick and wants to give him a shot, which likely entails that he knows Keiichi is falling victim to Hinamizawa syndrome and that he wants to give him a shot to try and prevent the symptoms from worsening. However, in the sequel, Keiichi goes to the clinic, which is remodeling. I believe this has something to do with Takano and Tomitake going missing, and I have a feeling I know what this whole remodeling thing means, which we'll talk about a little later. Change number 2. Keiichi ends up going to school instead of staying absent. In the original, he has a conversation with Ooshi where he tells Keiichi that he's the one in danger, which furthers his anxiety and ups his symptoms even more. But he doesn't talk to Ooshi, so he doesn't get any worse in the sequel. Rika tries to comfort him at school, and this is very clearly her getting in the way because she thinks Keiichi is going to attempt to murder Rena and Mion based off her prior knowledge. So she tells Keiichi to have faith in her friends, which is something she learned from him. Very nice how it kind of comes full circle like that. She even goes as far to tell him that she knows he can win, having full faith that he'll overcome it this time so she won't have to redo things again. Number 3. Now, let's talk about the big boy stuff. Rena at Keiichi's house. The first big difference is that Keiichi's mom tells her that Rena is bringing him food over and that she had prepared for her to do that. In the original, this didn't happen at all. Keiichi's parents went out of town and Mion and Rena brought him snacks on their own free will because Keiichi had skipped school due to him being quote-unquote sick that day. And he was hallucinating out of his mind by this point because of how deep in Hinamizawa Hinamizawa syndrome he was. So the fact that his mom asked Rena to bring him food is really interesting. Keiichi almost falls victim to the symptoms worsening of Hinamizawa syndrome by not letting Rena in and hallucinating her opening the door. But then he remembers what Rika said, and then he remembers killing them again. He remembered twice in one loop his previous actions. This previously is unheard of in Higurashi, at least to my knowledge. So with this, he decides to let go and let Rena in, which is, you know, it was a big mistake, my dude. I'm really sorry. Rena comes in, doesn't let Keiichi help her unload her food because he doesn't want her to see that she brought a shitload of murder weapons. Rena lies to Keiichi about running into his mom at the grocery store and becoming friends with her there. Now this is where we get a big ass reveal. Rena has come down with Hinamizawa syndrome, and she's at stage 5 to boot. Rena tells Keiichi while scratching her neck that she has to protect her dad and her family, which to Keiichi probably makes zero sense. She then proceeds to attempt to murder him, but instead gets killed herself, with Keiichi somehow living. I don't know how he survived this, but you know, good job, brother. Change number 4. Keiichi arrives at a hospital, and at that hospital he learns that Rika and Satoko were murdered, and then he presumably kills himself by scratching his own neck. Now, we've talked a lot about all the differences and additions and changes, but what does it all mean? Why did Rena want to kill Keiichi? What happened to Tomitake and Takano? After thinking on this for almost a week and rewatching both series, I'm confident that I've come to almost the exact answers as to what's happening. Keiichi's mom was cheating on Keiichi's dad with Rena's father. This became extremely clear to me when Rena tells Keiichi that when she kills him, her father would be at peace and be safe. The reason his mom is sleeping with him is likely due to him being very wealthy, which we learn in the original series when he's with the prostitute that Rena kills. In the Deen adaptation, we learn in the first arc that Keiichi's dad's job is not going the best that it could be. So it's very likely she's with Rena's dad due to him having so much money to try to bring money home to her family so they can continue to live in Hinamizawa. This is furthered by the scene where she says they run into each other at the grocery store and Keiichi says he never sees Rena there, and by the fact that Keiichi's mom asked Rena solely to bring him food when she didn't do that in the original series. This likely implying that Rena and Keiichi's mom have some kind of closer connection. This would also explain why every time Keiichi shows up at the dumpster when she's not expecting it, she gets anxious and jumpy, and how she almost tried to kill him in episode 2. Keiichi is the sole reason that his family lives in Hinamizawa, because some stuff went down in his school life back in the city. So if Rena kills Keiichi, then his parents will probably move back to the city. At least, that's likely what Rena was thinking. Killing Keiichi's mom wouldn't solve any issues because Keiichi would still be in town, which could likely put her father in quote-unquote danger because they could come to him for money again. Killing Keiichi is the one way she will guarantee her father's safety. This also almost certainly takes place in Sumihorobashi-hen, which is the timeline where Rena killed the prostitute and Satoko's uncle. Sumihorobashi-hen is the only arc in Higurashi that I can think of where Keiichi remembers killing Rena and Mion. Not to mention that Rena's speech in episode 3 lines up way too well with the original speech she gave in the manga arc. So yeah, even more evidence. And it would explain a few other things as well. She said she thought she was forgiven by Oyashiro-sama for something she did in the past, which is likely her killings. This is probably why she's so anxious about Keiichi talking to Oishi, because she doesn't want her old murders to resurface. It would also explain why she blindly gazes at Satoko, since one of the people she murdered was Satoko's uncle. I guarantee this arc will be replayed later through Rena's eyes, similarly to how we got that one arc in the original that took place from Shion's perspective. Now about what happened to Takano and Tomitake, I don't really know, but I am fairly certain that they are dead. In the original season, we learn that Takano takes Tomitake's bike into her car, and that she usually disposes his body on like the side of the road. However, in the sequel, Tomitake's bike has not moved, and her car is still parked in the same place. Since neither of these objects have moved, it is very unlikely that they are alive. It's very clear that the remodeling scene has the government transferring their research and most of their supplies into vans. Dr. Eri is also strangely absent from the first few episodes for whatever reason, so we don't know what he's up to. However, I am extremely positive that Takano's position was taken over by the nurse at Keiichi's side at the end of episode 4. She is aware of the neck scratching symptoms for Hinamizawa syndrome, and the way she asks so grimly about it makes me think she's the one behind the scenes now. Not to mention, we are deliberately shown a scene of her setting down a syringe, and Tomitake being given stage 5 of Hinamizawa syndrome was the cause of all of his deaths. I believe that she gave Keiichi stage 5 of Hinamizawa syndrome to keep the suspicion of the curse ongoing, making it look like he commits suicide. 2 people went missing this year, which means that 2 people had to die. Keiichi dying would continue that cursed suspicion. This would remove the first-person account of what happened and eliminate the risk of letting anything about the disease come out also. It's very clear that this girl is likely going to be the antagonist behind the scenes, like how Takano was, so we'll likely find out who she is as the season goes on. As for what happened with Rika and Satoko, I don't believe Rena killed them. I think that they died due to this unnamed nurse because she's probably under the assumption that Rika is the queen carrier. It's either her or they died to Shion, because the only other time the two died on the same night was when Shion murdered them. It's actually very possible that Shion could have been pretending to be Mion in this arc, because like I said earlier, the way she reacted to Keiichi was very different and more violent than it was in the original, and Mion tells Keiichi in the hospital that she's been dealing with a lot of other things in the background. This is all speculation though. Well, that's pretty much all I have for you guys today based off of the first 4 episodes. Now you know the key differences between Go and the original Deen adaptation, and what they mean. Go for sure is going to be an interesting ride. I'm very eager to see where the other arcs will go in their own separate ways. I'll be sure to do an analysis and difference comparison if needed for the next arc, so stay tuned for that. With that being said, thanks for watching.